What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Well, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack-Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Gutapi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison?
Swangles and Fort Lauderdale.
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host.
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on Iconic, Rockfin, Odyssey, or YouTube, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, thank you so much. We appreciate your support. We couldn't do the show without the help and amazing support of our sponsors. C60 Purple Power has been amazing for us. C60 is this naturally occurring molecule comprised of 60 carbon atoms that form something that looks like a hollow soccer ball. It was discovered by a group of scientists in the late 80s, and they won the Nobel Prize for it. It's pretty amazing stuff. It is what they describe as a free radical sponge. It roams your body, neutralizing free radicals, and then resets itself again and again. It is the most powerful antioxidant known. It's hundreds of times more powerful than anything out there. Not only can C60 help maximize the efficiency of cells in producing energy, but it may also provide cellular protection against many toxic environmental factors, which is the reason Ken Schwartz came across this substance in the first place. He was a nuclear engineer, and he was looking for something to protect his cells while he worked with dangerous materials, and everybody told him about this stuff called C60. It did such a good job for him that it cured his macular degeneration, and he wound up leaving that industry, getting into C60 full-time and starting C60 Purple Power. So why don't you just go over and take a look at the site and see if it's right for you. If it is, use the promo code MACRO to save yourself some money. They have free shipping inside the United States. And Ken is also somebody that understands the battles that we are fighting. He is definitely on the good side in this. So check out c60purplepower.com, promo code MACRO. And also, if we've lived through this insanity of 2020 and toilet paper shortages and things like that, then you know that you better get yourself prepared for what is coming. So My Patriot Supply has been nice enough to set us up with our own website. It's preparewithmacroaggressions.com. You can save yourself some money by going through there. They have emergency survivable food, all kinds of different batches. You can get a month's supply, a couple months supply. They have water filtration, air purification. They even have seeds. I don't think Alex Jones has seeds, right? So My Patriot Supply does. So check them out. Go to preparewithmacroaggressions.com and take a look and get yourself prepared. Look, if you don't buy something there, buy something somewhere. After what we've seen, you should probably get yourself prepared, because God knows things don't look like they're getting much better, and hopefully they don't get much worse. So, we are always happy to have Whitney Webb back on the show because she comes and drops a bunch of information on us that breaks our brain. She is the host of Unlimited Hangout. You can find her podcast on Rockfin. You can also go to her website, unlimitedhangout.com, and find her work writing for and doing audiovisual presentations for The Last American Vagabond, which is blowing up. And we've had Ryan on. So Whitney, great to have you back. How are you?
Doing well, all things considered. Some people may know, others may not, that I recently had a very international move, having to leave Chile because the COVID police state situation there is super unreal. Maybe if you follow me on Twitter, you're aware of it. Otherwise, maybe you're not. But it's really following an authoritarian lockdown model that has not been replicated in other countries. And most Chileans think lockdowns outside of Chile are like that. And I guess people abroad assume that Chile's lockdown is like theirs. Not the case at all. So definitely a lot going on in my life lately, which is why if you follow me more closely, you may have noticed that there hasn't been as much content as usual the past month or so, but that is about to change because as you can see, I am now more or less set up, which is a big relief for me to be able to have a nice workspace again, finally, after several weeks of limbo. So, but otherwise good, can't complain.
Good. Well, I remember, I'm on this email list for Sovereign Man, which is kind of like a guy that helps people think about planning residency in foreign countries and getting second passports and things like that. It's just a fascinating site. And I remember years and years ago, he moved to Chile and he was talking about it and he'd bought this farm and I was like, man, that might be the spot. That might be the safe haven in all of, in this world of insanity. This is like 2013. I'm thinking this and, I'm researching it. I'm going, wow, the climate in some parts, kind of like California, this might be a good option. It's been disappointing to see what's happened there.
Yeah.
And maybe I shouldn't be too surprised because of how over the top they were in the early 70s with the sort of insanity that they were running there. So, but it is disappointing to me to see such an authoritarian crackdown over something that, by all accounts, is being handled vastly differently throughout different regions of the world. I mean, from Sweden to Chile, you've got polar ends of this whole thing.
Yeah, well, I think, Chile in the early 70s basically became a test bed for things that the U.S. and UK and their allies wanted to test out elsewhere. That's why, for example, Chile is known to be the place where neoliberalism was born and then later exported.
Oh, that explains
to various countries abroad. Yes. The University of Chicago trained economists, personally trained by Milton Friedman, were given free rein to basically do what they wanted to do to the Chilean economy during the rule of Pinochet. And a lot of, the existing systems in Chile are still relatively the same as they were during that period, whereas some has changed. Of course, I think a big reason for the authoritarian crackdown under COVID in Chile has to do with the unrest that took place at the end of 2019 that demanded a new constitution replace the dictatorship era constitution. And the most recent, most severe lockdown was declared at the end of March, just in time to derail the elections to advance that rewriting of the constitution that was going to take place in mid-April. Now it's going to take place in mid-May, supposedly, but they're already saying they're going to have to move it because of how awful things are and things like this. And it's really, it's the current government of Chile, but also Chile's National College of Medicine is basically coming at Chile's already relatively authoritarian government, pressuring them to be even more authoritarian, but claiming, of course, it's under the guise of public health. So, there's a lot of bits, I guess, to how the quarantine system works in Chile. But, to sum it up briefly, you're only allowed out of your house twice a week for 2 hours a pop. And in order to be able to leave your house, you have to have papers that are generated through a police-run online website where you have to fill out a form that's run by the police. And then when you are out of your home, if you were requested to show your papers, you have to do that. You have to show them that permission to be out of your residence and to enter grocery stores and most places of commerce that are allowed to be open. You have to show it to get inside, which is pretty nuts. And in this whole situation, the National College of Medicine in Chile, they're calling that a lax quarantine, and they're asking for mobility to be reduced to 0, basically, and for the shuttering of more essential services and stuff. And they're associated generally with like the left, I guess, or viewed as sort of like a left-leaning institution in Chile, whereas the current government is supposedly right-leaning, with the current president of Chile, Sebastián Piñera, being the brother of Pinochet's finance minister, responsible for a lot of this test betting initially in the 1980s. It's I don't mean to laugh about it, but it is pretty clownish. In that regard, just like, of course, that's how it would be. But it's boiled down to an unfortunate situation, I think. And a lot of the reason it's been able to go forward is because there's a very poor diversity of media in Chile. It's pretty much TV news, CNN Chile, or state TV, or some other oligarch-owned TV station. That's pretty much it in the country for a majority of the country's population. And also the impacts of the Pinochet dictatorship, Operation Condor, the kidnapping and murder and disappearing of people, not just dissidents, but people believed to, a pre-crime approach to who might be dissidents in the future, obviously has a chilling effect and leads to most people that experience that, and for if they were old enough, when that dictatorship was going on, being more obedient by default, and on average, not everyone, obviously, but in general, people over 45 in Chile just tend towards that, in my personal experience. And I lived there 6 years, more than 6 years.
Wow. I wonder what the penalty is for hiding Jews in your attic in Chile. It's probably fairly high. I mean, this is like Papers, Please is straight out of World War II.
Yeah. I had a friend that actually saw someone at a bus terminal get arrested because they had the wrong paper to get on the bus.
Wow. I mean, when you grant a government special powers during emergencies, they will then create emergencies to justify using the special powers. So
forever, or to expand them more. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the feedback loop of terror and insanity. And that is that's frustrating because you get the feeling that is, like you said, a kind of a test market for that. Now I believe that there was a time, maybe I'm naive, but I believe that there was a time that the American government would look at something like that, or look at something like what's the authoritarian rule in China and go, ugh, we don't like that. That's not what we're all about. Unfortunately, these days, it seems like they take a look at what's happening overseas in these hardcore lockdown places and try to implement that. They say, we like what you've done there, Chile. We like, 2 hours a day. Oh, this is good. Let's incorporate that in. And it seems that this is it's being tested out in a variety of different countries. Who's in charge of this? Who's calling the shots on these decisions? Is this country specific? Are they given the flexibility to make the call on this, or is it coming from a more centralized location?
You mean in terms of Chile being used as a test bed right now for COVID?
Yeah.
Is that okay? So it's kind of hard to know, but from what I've seen, it seems to be that stuff that's been used in Chile, piloted in Chile under COVID, seems to pop up in the UK. In the UK, of course, sheltered Pinochet and prevented him from being sent back to Chile to face criminal charges for all of his crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and what have you. So, I mean, it is possible. I think the most glaring example of the parallels there was the 5-tier lockdown system introduced in the UK came 6 months after Chile put out its 5-step lockdown plan. And the similarities are really obvious. The only difference being that one uses ascending numbers as opposed to descending numbers for
mix it up.
Phases or steps. 1
They're on to us. Let's change the numbering.
Plausible deniability being like, well, our most severe lockdown is 1 and theirs is 5. So it's different. Yeah, well, that's pretty much.
Why not call Tom Ridge in and give it red, yellow, and green?
Oh yeah, well, I think
like
that's more for
NewsGuard.
the visual based American audience, you know.
Oh yeah. We're so illiterate. We can't even handle numbers. We need stoplight colors for it.
Who knows? I mean, they might think that it's really hard. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't pass anything past these people these days. They view us like worse than dirt. So.
Yeah, they really do. It's been a disgusting progression to watch this. I think I can't really determine yet what I'm more disgusted about: the authoritarian nature of what America and the West has become, or the applauding of the dumbed down sheeple people just saying, please come in, more authoritarian measures, more lockdowns, more mandatory vaccines, more vaccine passports. This has been, God, to call it a psychological operation would be an understatement. It's been to watch this social media component of the vaccine rollout, and to see my feed is maybe a little different from most people's feed, because I get a lot of the people that are saying we're not taking this anymore. But I do see a fair share of the people that are so proud and my Fauci ouchie, and they're taking pictures and they're doing all this. This seems like God, I don't know if it doesn't feel totally organic to me. It seems like it's been seeded, or maybe that it's meant to happen. What's your take on the social media component that's pushing the vaccine rollout?
That was totally planned out last year by the CDC. Their Vaccinate with Confidence framework, and a lot of some of the vaccine allocation strategies and planning put out by groups like the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, really emphasizing the use of social media, specifically social media influencers. We've had people like Instagram influencers, for instance, come out and say, I was offered thousands of dollars to post a vaccine selfie, just so people will know those offers are going around and stuff like that. If you read those documents, some of them I reported on last year, they make it really clear. And also that they plan to bring in the celebrities. And we've seen that really pick up in the past couple of weeks, like these new pro COVID-19 vaccination concerts, sort of like a Live Aid type style thing with Pearl Jam or Eddie Vedder, and the Foo Fighters and Jennifer Lopez or whatever. Yeah. And then a lot of other, well-known celebrities have been posting their thing. The most crazy to me, though, was the Anthony Hopkins one. Not sure if you saw that, but you literally see the woman inject it into the dirt behind the window or wherever onto the ground, and not into him. Really makes you wonder, maybe he took the money for the vaccine selfie, but didn't want to take the vaccine itself. It just kind of underscores the propagandistic nature of this type of stuff, and how the whole vaccination campaign is based on coercion, in this case being peer pressure from celebrities or maybe your friends on social media, but also coercion from the state, with vaccine passports, or also the private sector. You can't come in our business in the future without having received this, employers mandating it for their employees and things like that. It's really just based on coercion. So that's just one angle of it, I would say, is this, celebrity influencer, social media promotion campaign.
What's that other, I forget the name of it. It's that other new agenda that's rolling out that is basically giving classifications for businesses that want to prove that they're
look for the seal on the wellness seal, or something like that. Yeah,
that
where you have to pay like $12,000 to get the sticker.
What a shakedown! That to me is like, that's mafia tactics. That's a nice flower shop you have there. It'd be a shame if something bad happened to it, and you go, no. See my seal, or this is like, no, like World War II, like put like the Star of David and the line through it, like, oh, see, I've got that. Don't burn down my store. It seems like a total shakedown racket. Have people turned their brains off in the last year? Because this stuff seems so obvious to me, and yet there's people lining up. Like, really, if Jennifer Lopez is the reason why you take the vaccine, like, you have to have
a Krispy Kreme donut.
Krispy Kreme donut, like, you have to have you take a good hard look at yourself in the mirror after, if that's your motivation. But also the most disgusting part about this is that it is that it works. Is that this social pressure and that the celebrity culture that we've built in the United States, that campaigns like this are actually effective, and that might be the most alarming part. I mean, are we getting to a point where we're just automatrons just going along with whatever the television tells us to do?
Well, I think in cases like this, it's important to keep in mind that when you see these things pop up on social media, the algorithms are tweaked so that they do pop up more often, so that more people are seeing them. Because we know that these social media companies manipulate their news feeds for various ends. You may remember a few years back, Facebook doing an experiment on users that did not consent to be in the experiment, manipulating their news feeds to see if they could make them more depressed and more anxious. And obviously if Facebook is asked to do that at a time when deemed convenient by some sort of psychological operations event going on, if they're asked to do it by a state government or an intelligence agency, Facebook has a history of complying with that. When approached by those types of agencies to do so. So it's worth keeping in mind that they're very actively promoting the vaccine as well. And so a lot of these selfies and some of these posts from, people that you and I would ask to take a long, hard look in the mirror is being overinflated. So it looks like a larger percentage of the population is into it than I think they actually are. And there's an effort to make people like us and our audiences feel isolated and things like that, because that really plays into their hands. And so I think from my experience, social media has a vested interest in manipulating their algorithms to create those impressions. But I definitely think there is a very concerning amount of the population that continues to fall for that stuff. Whether it's the dumbing down of the education system or how many decades we've been into the monopolization of the media ownership in the United States, and they're all following the same playbook and the same narrative and all of that stuff. It's the logical conclusion of that. And as well, I think this is the ultimate test of how far can these actors take policy, fear-based policy promotion, utilizing fear as the main basis to get people to go along with things they normally wouldn't go along with, because we're over a year into the COVID crisis. People that are still as afraid now as they were a year ago, I honestly think that's not going to be that big of a percentage for much longer. And so I think it's really a test at some point of how effective fear will continue to be, as a tactic for control and manipulation. And I think we may see it start to wear off for some people. I think that's definitely happened over the course of the past year. I think even if we don't necessarily see it on social media, a lot of people have woken up, and I think a lot of people are aware of the shift. I have talked to other people in independent media that run, sites that cover this. And it appears that while the number of outlets and personalities and content creators covering this sort of stuff has not really changed much or is even shrinking in the past year, the audience for that information is growing. So at least people, like me and probably like you are able to see that, but maybe people that are in our audiences may not necessarily know that if they're depending largely on social media for that type of information, or maybe, in their personal life, they're surrounded by normies. Right. or what have you. But I think there definitely has been a shift, because it's the longer they drag this out, it becomes harder to use the same justifications that were used last year. The lies and the contradictions start to compound and become more obvious. And so I think we'll see efforts to censor the internet and social media in general, the flow of information in general, become more overt as time goes on, because that's they can only really control the cover up and the narrative. And if they can't do that, they lose at the end of the day. So just because their own incompetence will eventually expose them in a huge way, they're aware of this, obviously. And so censorship is there. I think it's pretty clear they're going to become increasingly reliant on that.
Yeah. Well, Facebook making you depressed and anxious, and that color me surprised, right? I thought that was their business model, was to make people feel bad about themselves so they stay on there.
Right. Well, social media in general was a way to, they call it social. They framed it from the off as connecting us more and bringing us closer together, while in fact it's had a more isolating effect and caused major damage to just general human social interaction on a global scale, particularly for kids exposed to that at way younger ages that aren't socializing normally in school, especially now that, it's like Zoom school for a lot of kids and things like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really devious. And we can see some of these agendas play out through social media. We start to get better at recognizing buzzwords that come into play from seemingly out of nowhere. And one buzzword that I keep hearing is stakeholder capitalism. And it sounds fancy and it sounds important and it sounds like, hey, it's capitalism, right? It's some new version of it's where we're all going to be in it together, right? And as we know, we're never in it together. It's them and the rest of us down there. What is this term? Where's it coming from? What's it supposed to mean, and what does it actually mean? I guess is my question.
Okay, so stakeholder capitalism is the World Economic Forum word for this. Some other related organizations, including people closely tied to WEF, use the term inclusive capitalism and things like that, because that's sort of the idea they want to promote about the stakeholder capitalism concept, that all different sectors of society will be included instead of just companies generating profits for shareholders. It's the stakeholders have the power. But that, of course, isn't the same as the people having the power, but that's sort of how they want to set this up. Basically, for all intents and purposes, stakeholder capitalism is basically a way of labeling what the World Economic Forum has always done, public-private cooperation, trying to find a way that makes it sound like it's its own economic system. And that's basically what it is. As they describe it, it's, stakeholders from this part of the public sector and this part of the public sector, stakeholders from this part of the private sector and this part of the private sector, and stakeholders from these NGOs. And if you ever look deeply into NGOs that are affiliated with these kind of groups, they are more often than not a front for some sort of public entity or intelligence agency or cutout or something like that, or for a private company, a group of private companies, a lobby, or a powerful oligarch, or things like that. So that's really this model, but they're sort of promoting it as, all parts of society will be more active in the economy and in defining the direction of the economy and making decisions on the economy, when really it's about like unelected representatives representing public and private entities on a global scale. That's really stakeholder capitalism, or inclusive capitalism, as it's called by the Vatican, which actually has their Council for Inclusive Capitalism that includes Mark Benioff, who's on the World Economic Forum Board of Trustees, CEO of Salesforce, and the chair of the World Economic Forum's Fourth Industrial Revolution Center, among other things, but also Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, Jeffrey Epstein associate, who now runs Inclusive Capital Partners, is her deal. But it also has the CEOs of MasterCard and Visa, Ernst & Young, some of the biggest companies in finance and accounting, and just the economy in general. So, there are big forces that are pushing for this to be implemented. And it's definitely cause for concern because, obviously for corrupt actors in both the public and private sectors, this is a win for them. It's basically a way to make fascism sound nice. That's how I look at it.
Let me get this straight. The Vatican and one of the Rothschilds coming together on something, and it might not be the best for the public.
Yeah, it also, I forgot to, that same council also has the Lauder family, like Ronald Lauder's family.
Oh, good.
The Estee Lauder people, who are also like very involved with U.S. and Israeli intelligence and
he was the head of the Jewish Congress,
World Jewish Congress,
Jewish Congress,
and before him it was Edgar Bronfman, also part of this organized crime intelligence nexus that Epstein was a part of, and Leslie Wexner and all of that stuff.
What could possibly go wrong? But you would think that the guys that were the hardcore Jewish guys and the hardcore Vatican guys might be be polar opposites, but it seems that maybe they are teaming up together to enslave humanity all at once, because when you do a deal with the Vatican, I see that as the opposite of maybe what traditional Catholics and people think. Say, oh, that'd be great.
Sure, but I think a lot of traditional Catholics really don't like the current Pope and see him as sort of a guy that heavily promotes, globalist agendas, which isn't necessarily incorrect, as seen by this Council for Inclusive Capitalism, where he's, claiming, I'm going to give my moral guidance and all of this stuff and influence a more equitable, better economic system for everyone, but I'm gonna, do it in partnership with like the most corrupt entities and individuals on the planet. I mean, that's pretty obvious what's going on there. But yeah, it's kind of funny to see like the Pope involved, trying to give it some sort of like, religion approved rubber stamp, I guess, as it will inevitably and invariably get rubber stamps from the public and private sector actors that are very enthusiastic about this type of system going forward. And obviously, this is the type of system that that the WEF, of the Great Reset plans to follow that reset. So it's worth keeping that in mind, that this is really just creating the foundation. So when the right event happens, another catalyzing event or series of catalyzing events, this will be the solution waiting in the wings. They've planned out essentially how it'll work, and they just want to, they're basically just waiting for the right time to implement it.
So you're saying that the World Economic Forum is waiting for the final solution? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know.
I mean, they are the Fourth Reich, after all. It seems.
Oh man! Every time someone says that term, I just can't. I just remember the Bill Gates, Stephen Colbert giggle, where he says "final solution," talking to Stephen Colbert about COVID last year. And then Stephen Colbert's, maybe you shouldn't use that word. And then Bill Gates has this insane nervous giggle about himself. It's pretty interesting. But on those catalyzing events that I mentioned, maybe we could talk about what those because they have signaled some things. So I haven't written about this myself, but I would encourage people to go back and look at this speech Klaus Schwab gave before Davos this year. It was basically like a short conference or panel on what Davos this year was going to be about and what have you. And in it, Klaus Schwab gave a couple predictions for what would happen in 2021. And the main one that I think people are already seeing now, and this was just a few months ago, but it really in the past couple of weeks, it's picked up, is Klaus Schwab says something along the lines of, this is the year where COVID is not going to have a monopoly on our attention anymore. It's going to give way to something else. And he says that's going to be climate change, or that COVID and climate change are sort of going to merge in a sense in some sort of event that scares a lot of people towards the end of the year. But he basically says the attention that's focused on COVID now, the fear and concern and the policies will at some point shift away from COVID to climate change over the course of this year, or that climate change will become directly incorporated into this effort related to, or we're operating under the guise of COVID. And what's interesting is that not that long after Schwab gave the speech, you have Bill Gates going on a new media tour, like he did a couple times last year. But instead of talking about COVID and pandemic and vaccines and all of this, he's talking about climate change. So it's very interesting to see that he starts to move it that way. Then not that long after Bill Gates does that, The Guardian starts to say that there needs to be lockdowns every 2 years for climate goals, saying that lockdowns are not only a tool for combating COVID, even though the evidence points in the opposite direction, but they're a tool for combating climate change. And we've just seen a lot of that rhetoric continue to grow in relation to climate change. And I think actually the efforts of the World Economic Forum on the financial side of things, going after crypto as cybercrime, they're also going to try and go after crypto with this the climate change narrative, saying that Bitcoin uses too much electricity, it's not environmentally sound enough, and it needs to, Bitcoin mining needs to be halted and stopped, perhaps by force, making it a criminal offense or what have you. They sort of hint at this, becoming possibilities, but they'll frame it either as a way to combat cybercrime or a way to combat climate change.
Yeah, well, good luck with that, because half the Bitcoin is being mined in China, so they're not going to be able to shut that down. But there's also, it reminds me of James O'Keefe from Project Veritas exposing CNN, and that
more
CNN
recently, yes,
producer saying, well, we're really going to pivot to climate change from here on out. So clearly, the word is out that the instructions have been sent that they're going to try and tie this to climate change. Now, for people that are interested about climate change, they think, well, is this a real thing or not? Well, I would encourage them to at least take a look at the Club of Rome's book, Limits to Growth, that was written in 1971, where they talk openly about how they are going to use the concept of global warming, and it doesn't matter whether it is real or one invented for this purpose. And it's going to be the pretext used to create a carbon tax system that will then be set up by these globalist maniacs, that they will go around and decide which industries have to pay carbon taxes, and then eventually down to the people itself. And that
if I can just add to that, the Club of Rome was intimately involved in the creation of the World Economic Forum, which is really important to point out. And actually, Limits to Growth was the main focus point of their, I think, 1971 meeting, one of their first meetings, if not their first meeting. So a lot of promotion of that and these neo-Malthusian ideas, which is very common in this group. Speaking of CNN earlier and how he, this guy that was on Project Veritas inadvertently sort of leaked this agenda. CNN was run by or owned by Ted Turner, who's one of the most well-known Malthusian billionaires who's been talking about reducing the global population for years and years and years. And he's also intimately involved in bioterror, and this effort that Bill Gates is also involved in, where Bill Gates really openly talks about it in 2018, this effort to merge national security with health security as a way to prevent future pandemics and all of this. And that's why we're seeing this increasing involvement of DARPA and the US military and intelligence agencies and COVID cures and preventative COVID treatments and all of this stuff. Really crazy. But the Club of Rome, too, of course, has its ties to Malthusian oligarchs as well, because it was created at a Rockefeller residence in Italy, is where that club's origins lie. So the Rockefellers, of course, one of the most invested in population control stuff. So, and the key point there is they're intimately involved with the whole WEF agenda from the off. So you can't really separate those agendas.
Yeah, and Dr. Alexander King, who is one of the co-founders of the Club of Rome, also was a founder of the Committee of 300. He was heavily involved in the creation of the Tavistock Institute, or at least the promotion of the Tavistock Institute. Right. So you're talking about maybe the worst people in the world. You take Dr. Alexander King, you take the Rockefellers, you put them together, you bring in Klaus Schwab, who comes from, who's a Swiss industrialist that made machine parts. His family made machine parts for the Nazis during the war. So this is maybe, there's a lot of people that, Jim Marrs wrote a book called The Fourth Reich. And there's a lot of people that think that maybe take that term, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and just rename that the Fourth Reich, because this is what these people have in mind. And by all accounts, those that have a deep understanding of World War II say that the Nazis didn't necessarily lose the war. They just were absorbed into a variety of countries, the United States being one of them. We know how heavily they were involved in our rocket programs through Wernher von Braun and Operation Paperclip, but they were also taken in as far as intelligence agencies, and they delivered some of these new concepts to us. I remember reading somewhere that when after Operation Paperclip, they were asked, the Nazis were asking the Americans, so have you put fluoride in the water yet? And they're like, what are you talking about? And they said, no, you got to put fluoride in the water. It makes the population docile. And they said, instead of going, no, we would never do that, they're like taking notes, like fluoride water.
Brilliant.
Great idea. Let's do this. Came straight from the Nazis themselves. So we do, we kind of goof about it, but there is still this influence, and the things that the Third Reich wanted to do, control the world, they were never able to do for a variety of reasons and mismanagement and their the way they ran the war. But now in this new digital world, probably the first chance anyone has ever had to actually conquer the world. And it seems that the World Economic Forum has taken that upon themselves to be the arbiter of what we are going to do moving forward as far as the financial system that we use, the fuel systems, that we use, the way we view
the whole supply chains. They plan to do all of that, especially for mining and minerals. They're a key part of that. And I think that's why there's been a lot of random deaths of African leaders in the past year. Has been a lot of it's been related to that. And of course, we know that the effort to overthrow Evo Morales in Bolivia was related to lithium mining. But I think even some of the authoritarianism going on right now in Chile is related to the fact it's one of the top copper exporters in the world, and things like that. Different countries want to secure, their access to these minerals to be able to be an economic hegemon or a market leader or whatever in all of this stuff. So that is. That's the John Perkins Confessions of an Economic Hitman model, where the IMF and World Bank would get these find these countries that they target that they want, and they would extend loans to them that they couldn't repay, and then they get them under their control and manipulate them to do the things they want them to do. So the World Economic Forum is pushing forward, though, mostly with, it seems, this digital enslavement. So talk about what they're doing, where we're going to see things going moving forward. Their public-private partnerships with these intelligence agencies and these for foreign country. 8200 is involved, obviously, and a variety of them. What do they have planned for us? Well, that group specifically you're referring to is the World Economic Forum Partnership Against Cybercrime, as they say. Yes, and so it includes groups, globalist think tanks. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is one. The Council of Europe is another one on there, and I think Third Way is another one of these sort of interrelated think tanks. That's part of this. Then you have some Unit 8200 front organizations like Team 8, which is run by a former commander of Unit 8200, was funded into existence by Google's Eric Schmidt, actually. But even people in the U.S. government have actually acknowledged in mainstream cyber publications that it's basically a front for Israeli intelligence. So they're on there, as well as several cybersecurity companies that were created by Unit 8200 alumni, like Checkpoint Software, and is one of the better known on this list, and a handful of others. You also have big U.S. Silicon Valley companies. You have Amazon involved in this, and of course you have a lot of the biggest banks in the world. Bank of America pops up over and over again. You also have something called the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center being a part of this, and their members are basically the biggest banks, credit unions, and financial services companies in the United States, who they don't make their membership public, but if you look at their board of directors, you'll see several executives from the biggest banks and insurance companies and things like that up there. So you can assume they're members, but beyond that, you can't exactly know. And there's a lot of ties between them and the World Economic Forum as an organization as well. Like their founding director is on the WEF board, and stuff like this. But basically, this group and the World Economic Forum Carnegie Endowment, cyber initiative that I wrote about recently, they basically argue for a merging of private banks and financial services companies, the public sector agencies that would normally be in charge of regulating them, and intelligence agencies, all sort of coming together to combat cyber attacks and cybercrime, because they're basically framing a cyber attack that takes down or halts or causes severe mortal damage to the existing financial system as something that's going to imminently happen. They don't exactly put a date on it, so I don't really want to either. But they increasingly, especially this year, like FSISAC, this private bank information sharing center, basically frame it as something as one of their predictions for 2021, and they're claiming, of course, that this imminent growth, explosion in cyber attacks and cybercrime is being driven by the increasing valuation of cryptocurrencies. So they're basically trying to link cryptocurrency to cybercrime, despite the fact that the most recent data shows that last year, despite a reported explosion in crypto cybercrime, 0.34% of all crypto transactions were crime related, which is down from 2% in 2019. So they're obviously overinflating this problem to sell this solution, which is basically a stakeholder capitalism model, right? You have these different public and private groups, and then these nonprofit groups like this information sharing center, which is made up of private banks, but it's nonprofit, right. Framing them as a stakeholder. And of course, that organization already acts as a liaison between the public and private sector by sharing information with like U.S. law enforcement and things like this when it gets things from member banks and vice versa. These are the types of organizations involved, but also on board are the central banks themselves. I'd encourage people to go look at my last report on The Last American Vagabond about this. You also have the SWIFT system involved, the Federal Reserve of the U.S., the Bank of England, other central banks, Interpol, Europol, all down for this. And one common theme in there is a plan to go after Bitcoin specifically out of all the cryptocurrencies. People that intend to hold Bitcoin long term definitely want to plan to have their own infrastructure set up to hold that, because they talk about going after infrastructure of cyber criminal tokens and currencies and what have you specifically. So, it also depends on what legislation and laws are made in the future. If you don't pay tax on your crypto, does it become a crime? Then can they come seize your crypto earnings then and all of this stuff? And does that become a cyber criminal offense then? Right. And these same groups actually explicitly talk about broadening the definition of what constitutes a financial crime, with the obvious intention then of sweeping up more people who are not currently defined as cyber criminals. And they're obviously doing this not because cybercrime is a huge problem, because the data shows it's not. It's because these types of the specific currencies, cryptocurrencies they plan to target, are those that present a direct threat to central bank digital currencies that they've already launched in some countries, or they're waiting in the wings. And obviously, if you allow Bitcoin or something that a competitor to be used, unimpeded, people are going to gravitate towards that for the anonymity, and also the fact that they don't have expiration dates like a lot of these digital currencies that are being rolled out now by central banks are set to have. So they can force you to spend the money, basically preventing you from deciding if you save or spend your own wealth, which is obviously just an insane, huge overreach. But we've already seen, talks of doing this with the recently launched digital yuan in China, and the Bank of England Britcoin that was recently announced a few days or maybe a week ago or so also talked of that same feature potentially being incorporated. I think we know what the Bank of England will ultimately choose. But it's definitely, people need to consider if they're going to hold one of the soon to be forbidden cryptocurrencies running your own nodes and infrastructure, though they have also talked about allowing people to keep Bitcoin, but only if they use a custodian wallet service, as they call it, where basically some sort of trusted authority or entity holds your keys for you and thus access to your crypto for you. Because the anonymity is a no-no for them. They want to eliminate cash and they want to eliminate anything else that could offer privacy or anonymity. So that's probably, they've made efforts, the World Economic Forum, to make inroads with different people associated with different cryptocurrencies. I guess there's some they plan to incorporate into this new system they wish to build, and others they do not. So, we'll see what happens, I guess, but it's worth, discussing their plans and what, how they plan to target things and all of this to know how to prepare if you wish to do that. Sure. And going back to this partnership against cybercrime, they basically that organization has basically created the framework for a global fin cyber utility that would basically be the merging of these intelligence agencies and banks and their regulators. And they set it up in a really weird way where basically there's the overarching partnership Below that, they have organizations they call permanent nodes, which are basically these organizations that are already go-betweens between the public and private sector. And then the creation of out of each private node of temporary trust groups called like threat-focused groups that would basically go after certain threats or cyber threat actors or what have you together. So they've definitely really planned out how they want to set this up. They already have a list of organizations that could serve as potential permanent nodes. And basically the way they frame it, they have a timeline in there for the takeoff of this global fin cyber utility. They plan to basically convert this partnership against cybercrime in about a year's time into this global fin cyber utility. So if you want to speculate about the date, it seems like they're going to try and do some sort of event with markets in the next year or so, if their own timetable in that sense, not in terms of when the cyber attack will happen, but when they plan to openly announce this global financial cyber utility to tackle cybercrime and all of that stuff. They sort of have it launching at some point in 2022. If that helps people figure it out. But it's definitely something to pay attention to. They don't want people to be able to control their own wealth, obviously. Everyone knows you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. But the idea here isn't that no one owns nothing. It's that you will own nothing and they, the elite, will own everything, right? Yeah. Otherwise, they would say no one owns nothing, I guess. Or frame it differently. The you there is you, the underclass.
Yeah. Well, they could have used the Judge Smales, "You'll get nothing and like it" quote, because that's more appropriate to what their plan is. And I think the definition of a shit coin is Britcoin. I think that for those people out there, a token with an expiration date that allows you to shop on the company store and then turns into dust at midnight, man, that is their dream. And what could be more nightmarish than a blending of the intelligence agencies and the big banks internationally? Oh my God. I mean, that's extremely dangerous. And that kind of takes me to my next point, which is this direction that we're headed with AI surveillance-based policing. And this dystopian hellscape that we're headed towards. We're starting to see, we see DARPA rolling out, or Boston Dynamics and DARPA together rolling out robot dogs, and we're starting to see more and more of these. We just saw that, we obviously last year we saw it in Singapore policing some park, and we're like, oh, that's quaint. That's cool. That's weird, And then a couple of weeks ago, we see them marching one of these robot dogs out of the projects in
New York. Yeah.
In someplace in New York. And you go, whoa, okay. This is.
But it was always going to get there. People that were like, you're a conspiracy theorist for thinking they'd do that.
Right.
No, it's the same people who tell you now that Neuralink, the chip in your brain, is just to help disabled people, paralyzed people walk again and all of this stuff. It never stops there. That's how they sell it to you.
Of course.
They're not going to commercialize it just to help the disadvantaged. They're commercializing it because they intend on it having a mass market, perhaps forcibly so, because there is going to be a huge move, and it's already there, specifically in the United States, to frame the Biden administration as solving a bunch of societal ills by ushering in surveillance technology as the solution. So my site will be publishing some stuff on this in the near future. Efforts to replace private prisons with biometric wearables, sort of as a parole thing, but you can harvest mass data from them in a way you can't when they're necessarily in prison. Harvesting data is becoming more profitable than harvesting them for prison slave labor. So we're going to see that trend advance, and then there'll be praising of Biden. He's closed the private prisons, right? Same thing with nonviolent drug offenders. effort. They're talking about having that same biometric system applied to them, and also people combating the opioid epidemic with biometric wearables, because there's a company actually that's claimed to develop with NIH funding a biometric wearable that will be able to predict when someone who has had an opioid overdose in the past is hankering for opioids again, based on various biometric signals. And that won't just stop with opioid stuff. They'll extend it to all different illegal substances, in the near future. And so, this is just this type of trend we're going to see more and more, but it's going to be framed as in these sort of savior progressive terms, where, I guess that's how they're going to manufacture consent for this on the left specifically. And, we've already seen the mainstream media try and frame Biden as the new FDR, as clownish as that is, and all this stuff, and this progressive savior figure. When, if you just remember a few months ago, it's really obvious. It should have been really obvious to everyone. The guy's senile and can barely talk, and stuff like that. So, he's clearly not the one making decisions here. But the DNC fused with Silicon Valley well before the 2020 election, but they have former top executives from Facebook, Amazon, you name it. They're pretty much involved in the DNC at this point. And so that's why a lot of what went on in the 2020 election itself was controversial. And that's why we're going to see this increase push towards emerging tech and the mass harvesting of data and all of this stuff. It's also an extension of the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence that was chaired by Eric Schmidt. They've concluded their report, and there is basically this call that if the U.S. wishes to maintain military and economic hegemony, they have to beat China and make better AI algorithms than China, meaning that they have to harvest more data per citizen that can then be used to train those algorithms, basically. So China has lots of advantages. They're more technocratic already. They have a much larger population. So basically, there needs to be a way to milk more data out of every American than the Chinese government is currently doing to every Chinese citizen. So that obviously isn't going to go over well if it's, framed that way to the public. So they're selling it as, the completion of various longstanding progressive agendas. They'll be doing the same with police reform. These calls for police reform to fund the police. They're going to be, saying, well, if it's a robot interacting with people, the robot isn't going to make a mistake. The robot isn't racist, and blah, blah, blah.
RoboCop. The robot shoots up the entire boardroom. Okay. The robot can most definitely. I've watched Black Mirror. I've seen what the robot dog does.
Well, we already know that the facial recognition algorithms and a lot of the pre-crime stuff currently used by law enforcement agencies in the U.S., like Palantir or the Amazon facial recognition software, are racially biased against minorities. So they clearly won't solve the race issue. It's just replacing systemic racism with a different kind of systemic racism, but one that can't be questioned because it's computer says logic. We can't challenge the almighty computer. But they're going to sell robots. It as cost saving, so we can still have safety and order in policing, but without the racist policemen themselves. And then, of course, it'll also be sold to law enforcement officers by saying, do you really want to be in a situation where you shoot someone and then all this happens to you, all these protests and blah, blah, blah. They're going to sell it to them, too, as safer for them. You may not end up in a high profile trial in prison as long as, you're sort of managing all these different drones, overseeing this area or in this, there's different ways they can sell it, but it's definitely tending towards that way. And a day after the Derek Chauvin, however you say his last name, verdict, they were in Forbes. They were talking about the need to bring in Microsoft and Amazon to make policing more equitable and safer and all of this stuff. So, it's really obviously part of the agenda, but it has been for a long time. Predictive policing has been heavily promoted for years. The Trump administration tried to enact it broadly, and actually Bill Barr wrote a directive basically starting up pre-crime in the United States, at least as far as the FBI was concerned, at the end of 2019. And a lot of that was about allegedly, it was justified as necessary to prevent mass shootings before they can take place. Because if you remember, at the end of 2019, the fear point of choice by the mainstream media was mass shootings before being replaced with COVID a few months later. So, whatever.
I could solve the mass shooting problem. Just defund the FBI.
Yeah. Well,
then all the mass shootings go away. Yeah.
People that know what the FBI does, it's pretty clear that's the way to go. And actually, in March 2020, when everyone's distracted by COVID, DHS and the FBI and all of this basically attend a congressional hearing where they say that they're no longer going to be basically entrapping Muslim Americans. The same program entrapping that's been entrapping Muslim Americans since after 9/11 is now going to target, basically white American males to create a new type of boogeyman that's more suited to the domestic terror, a war on domestic terror than a war on terror abroad, is basically what they say. And what's interesting too is one of the main organizations the FBI is using to tell them who is a terrorist to investigate and entrap is the Anti-Defamation League.
I was going to say SPLC, but the ADL would have been my second choice.
It's the ADL.
Yeah, of course. What could possibly go wrong when the ADL calling the shots on who isn't a domestic terrorist?
And this is really crazy that it's you don't see more criticisms of them around because they have so much power, not just in that sense now, being able to tell the FBI who's a terrorist and who's not, basically being like snitch in chief. For the U.S. national security state domestically. I mean, that's crazy. But they also have a lot of control over online censorship through their Silicon Valley hate lab that was actually funded largely into existence largely by Pierre Omidyar, who just a few years prior was framed as the savior of journalism with the creation of The Intercept and the whole Edward Snowden Greenwald affair. Yeah, and
don't go to them if you've got a leak. Don't go to them, or you'll wind up in handcuffs somewhere.
Yeah. So they sent 3 or 4 whistleblowers to jail.
Yeah.
It's a mess. So,
So Biden, we'll wrap up with this. President Green Screen, he is being touted as this sort of progressive. He's changing things. He's going to look at digital new ways of doing things. When do you think he's clearly not in charge? I mean, physically, he's not in charge. Who do you think is actually calling the shots in this administration? Who is because we know it's not him. Kamala Harris hasn't had an original thought her entire life. Can't be her. And that, of course, then makes me feel very uncomfortable because then it could be anybody behind the scenes pulling the strings here. Who do you your best guess is who's running things?
So if you remember back, Kamala Harris was sort of coronated back before the most recent Democratic primary by old Clinton donors in the Hamptons and what have you. So I think it's a combination of that and Silicon Valley oligarchs who, the amount of donations to the Biden campaign from the biggest names in the top executives at the biggest tech companies in the U.S. were astronomical and, drastically favored Biden in comparison to Trump. I think it's, we know from the Trump administration, his biggest donor in a big way was Sheldon Adelson. He did whatever Adelson asked of him. That type of money flow in the case of Biden, if you added up, the top people in Silicon Valley are that for Biden. And as I mentioned earlier, the DNC, their main people intimately involved with all of that. I think it's somewhere in that mix for sure, but it's hard to know exactly who's calling the shots in a particular issue at a given time. But I think in terms of trying to promote certain, surveillance tech and all of this stuff as a way to fulfill progressive agendas. I mean, that's definitely Silicon Valley driving that. And they have always been big backers of Kamala Harris as well, over her political career. So I definitely think they're playing a major role in this. It may be to a lesser extent in foreign policy, but I think that's changing. For example, with Elon Musk talking about we'll coup whoever we want with Bolivia because of the lithium mining and all of that. that. Elon Musk is now more intimately involved. I forget exactly when, but recently teaming up with Glencore, the mining giant originally created by Mark Rich. That's been
that's Clinton,
people like us
buddy.
known to be in a Mossad front. And Ehud Barak literally screamed at Bill Clinton in the face to pardon Mark Rich, and then he did right before leaving office, which is super controversial. Mark Rich being the person who created Glencore. So it's just really wild to look at that. But apparently Elon Musk's father randomly owned half an emerald mine in Zambia. He owned half of it. So I wonder who owned the other half. It'd be interesting to look into that at some point. But Elon Musk's rise is definitely not an organic one. And I think they're actually framing him and SpaceX to sort of, it seems like that's sort of going to dovetail a little bit with this new Pentagon buildup towards releasing new info about UFOs and all of this stuff. Because SpaceX had this recent launch and they allegedly were tipped off by U.S. Space Command that they were almost going to collide with a UFO, right? Just after the Pentagon says we're going to release this report. We have known about UFOs for a long time. We're going to make a big announcement on it soon. I mean, obviously it's going to be used to distract people from something. If they're willing to put that information out now, there's clearly an agenda to it. I urge all critical thinkers to think through this a few times. Don't trust the military with this being your sole, the sole source of information on stuff like this. Because they do psychological operations all the time and have come up with lots of wacky plans over the years for psyops, including alien invasion. So, take it with a grain of salt.
So if I'm reading you correctly, what you're saying is Eric Schmidt is the president of the United States. Gotcha.
I think that's really possible. Yeah. Well, he headed up the National Security Commission on AI in the co-chair or the vice chair of that is someone who's very close to Eric Schmidt. Bob Work, who used to be Undersecretary of Defense, or Deputy Secretary of Defense, I believe, actually under Obama. So they basically have been working together to advance this agenda. And you're having people now calling Eric Schmidt the new Henry Kissinger.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So that should tell you a lot about Eric Schmidt's importance. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is not the terminology that you want associated with your name. Not if you're a decent human being. Maybe if you're
but they're friends. Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger are actually very close. So for them to be comparing, saying Eric Schmidt's the new Kissinger, it probably has the blessing of existing blob demon Kissinger. So
well,
that's how it looks to me. But I definitely think Eric Schmidt has way too much control. It doesn't get enough coverage at all. This man, this former CEO of Google, a lot of controversies behind him, basically just deciding the future of the national security state's policy as it relates to AI. National security state being the military and the intelligence community, broadly speaking. Why is he making decisions for that? No one elected him, but he was actually appointed under Trump, oddly enough, because that commission was created in 2018. But
trust the plan, Whitney. Trust the plan.
Well, I don't know if Trump personally appointed him, but he was chosen when it took place. It took place under the Trump administration. Trump didn't complain, and then Ivanka and Jared Kushner were involved in their own AI policy development plans at the same time that sort of dovetailed with that. But more broadly speaking, the National Security Commission on AI, if you look at its members, it's the people from the biggest Silicon Valley companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Google through Schmidt, and another Google guy, all of these guys, plus intelligence agents, people that work for intelligence agencies, like there's two, the current and a former director of the CIA's NQTEL. You have the former director of the intelligence community's equivalent of DARPA, IARPA, the list goes on. So these are the guys coming together to create basically what will be the new government as this technocratic agenda advances.
Good Lord.
That's the real government, I would say.
Yeah. How fast can we get to Mars or somewhere else? I want off this planet immediately. This is no good. Hey, tell everyone what you're working on. What's coming up in the near future for you?
Okay, so I'm working on an article right now that's a sequel to the one I sort of alluded to earlier about the World Economic Forum, Carnegie Endowment Plan to merge banks and intelligence agencies and all of this stuff. So what I mentioned earlier, a little bit about the Partnership Against Cybercrime, who they are, what they're planning for in the cryptocurrency angle that we've discussed a little bit is actually going to be the receipts, and all the details for that will be in my upcoming report. And then after that, I'll be continuing my two-part article. The second part of it on Facebook will be out. So the first article was on the military origins of Facebook. Basically, its ties to DARPA's LifeLog program, and also how Peter Thiel, at the time he invested in Facebook, was asked to do so by one of the Facebook executives who was recruited actually by the CIA at the ripe age of 16, and got Peter Thiel to be the first outside investment in Facebook, which is what made it what it is today. Facebook would have died without that, for sure. And at the time, Peter Thiel was actively working with neocons like Richard Pearl and John Poindexter to resurrect total information awareness in the aftermath of 9/11, which was actually a public-private program in itself, but making it a completely private sector effort. So Palantir, as it exists now, is basically the software that TIA, Total Information Awareness, was going to run on. And complementary to TIA was this LifeLog thing that was managed under the same office within DARPA. And Facebook is that to the letter. Even the program manager of DARPA's LifeLog says Facebook is basically what we were trying to build, among other things. So the second article is going to be about how Facebook, since its origins, has advanced that agenda, them employing former DARPA directors like Regina Dugan, I think her name is, and a couple of other things to point out there, including they're the main private entity being promoted as creating a new stable coin, having recently renamed Libra and all of that stuff. So they're very clearly planning to have a much bigger role in society post Great Reset than they do currently. They're not planning to be a social network anymore. For example, they're working on a biometric wearable that's going to be coming out in the next year or two. That's going to be involved with this financial stuff and this effort to merge biometric identity, financial activity, and vaccine passports and all of that stuff, which, if you don't know already, the plan is to have all three of those together. Just look at the Vaccine Credential Initiative. I wrote about it in January. All the big names from tech in the US and the World Economic Forum and the people that currently make Common Pass, the vaccine passport being used in some places, all on board with this framework. So that's basically what's coming down the line.
And that'll be on Unlimited Hangout?
Yeah. Well, so the first one I mentioned about the cybercrime stuff and the World Economic Forum financial focused report will be for The Last American Vagabond. The Facebook one is for Unlimited Hangout.
That's Whitney Webb, everybody. Check out her stuff, support her work, find her on Rockfin as well. And if you like this episode, please take the additional step now of sharing it with your friends and family. Thank you, everybody. We will talk to you soon.